The atmosphere is a layer of gas trapped by the Earth's gravity. It warms the surface of the Earth by heat retention and reduces the day and night temperature extremes observed on other planets. It is also responsible for the continued existence of liquid water and is essential for life. At sea level, it is composed of about 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% other gases, including argon and carbon dioxide. Of these gases, oxygen is by far the most important because it is used by most living organisms for the production of energy. So, what is oxygen? Oxygen is an element with the chemical symbol O. It is a colourless, odourless gas and exists in two forms on Earth. At low altitude, it is diatomic in structure, which means that one molecule of oxygen is made up of two atoms. It is also very reactive and able to form oxides with most other elements, water being one such example. On the other hand, O3 is a triatomic variety of oxygen, better known as ozone, and found almost exclusively in the upper atmosphere, where it forms a protective layer. It shields the Earth by absorbing harmful ultraviolet radiation emitted by the sun. Why is oxygen so essential for life on Earth? Glucose is a simple sugar derived from the breakdown of carbohydrates during digestion. It is transported in the bloodstream and absorbed by the cells of the body along with proteins, fat, and oxygen. Once inside the cells, it is further broken down in a process called aerobic respiration, sometimes referred to as metabolism. This chemical reaction requires oxygen and takes place in specialized organelles called mitochondria, where the energy is finally released. How is oxygen carried in the bloodstream? In its purest form, iron is a fairly soft greyish metal, and it has the chemical symbol Fe, which makes reference to its Latin name ferrum. It is the most naturally magnetic of all the elements and a good conductor of electricity. It is also very reactive and will combine with oxygen in the presence of water or moist air to form a reddish-brown oxide known as rust. It is this property of iron which is exploited by hemoglobin, the oxygen-carrying protein found in red blood cells. The heme group, a component of hemoglobin, is an iron-rich complex that will absorb and release molecular oxygen with ease, and is what gives blood its red colour, i.e. iron oxide. Red blood cells, or erythrocytes to give them their proper name, are responsible for the distribution and ultimately the cellular absorption of oxygen. This transfer of oxygen across a cell membrane from high concentration to low is called diffusion, and it is also responsible for the cellular release of carbon dioxide into the bloodstream. How is oxygen transported around the body? The heart is a muscular organ made up of 4 chambers, the right atrium and right ventricle, and the left atrium and left ventricle. Together, these chambers contract and refill in a coordinated fashion in order to shift blood around the body. The heart can be thought of as 2 separate pumps working together at the same time. At rest, the heart will convey the whole of the circulating volume of blood, about 5 litres in an adult, every minute, and 3 or 4 times this amount during exercise. Deoxygenated blood, rich in carbon dioxide, passes from the right atrium into the right ventricle. It is then pumped to the lungs by way of the pulmonary artery. Inside the lungs, there are millions of tiny sacs called alveoli. Air rich in oxygen is inhaled into them, and oxygen diffuses into the bloodstream through their walls. At the same time, carbon dioxide diffuses out of the bloodstream before being exhaled out of the body altogether. From this point, the newly oxygenated blood travels to the left atrium, via the pulmonary vein to complete the loop. After passing through the left atrium, the oxygenated blood is pumped from the left ventricle into the aorta. This action can be felt as a pulse. It then makes its way around the body through a network of arteries. Capillaries facilitate the diffusion of oxygen into the cells of the body and allow for carbon dioxide, a byproduct of cellular metabolism, to escape. Once this exchange has taken place, the deoxygenated blood returns to the heart through a network of veins and ultimately enters into the right atrium by way of the superior and inferior vena cava to complete the loop. Prolonged oxygen deprivation can be fatal. At the 1 minute mark, brain cells begin to die. At 3 minutes, neurons suffer extensive damage and lasting brain injury becomes a reality. Beyond 5 minutes, death is inevitable. Pulse oximeters have revolutionized modern medicine with their ability to monitor blood oxygen levels and heart rate. In the hospital environment, they have radically improved patient safety and have helped to save countless lives. Pulse oximeters play a key role in healthcare by alerting hospital staff to the onset of oxygen deprivation, also known as hypoxia, and changes in pulse, enabling them to take the actions needed to prevent further deterioration. Because of their simplicity of use and their capacity to provide continuous and immediate readings, pulse oximeters are of critical importance and, along with ECG and blood pressure monitoring, are essential in anaesthesia, intensive care, and emergency medicine. Recently, for patients with COVID-19, pulse oximetry has been crucial for the early detection of silent hypoxia, a condition in which the patient still looks and feels comfortable, but whose saturation level is dangerously low. Being able to identify COVID-19 related pneumonia has made a massive difference to the probability of survival from coronavirus infection. In 1935, German physician Karl Mattes pioneered a 2-wavelength ear oxygen saturation meter, which employed red and green light filters. It was the first device to measure the oxygen saturation of blood non-invasively. Glenn Allen Millikan, an American physiologist, continued this work and developed the earliest portable monitor between 1940 and 42. The Millikan oximeter is generally recognized as being the first to be used in a clinical setting. The word oximeter was introduced by Millikan. Despite his advances, these machines were still inaccurate, especially because the pulse of blood generated by the left ventricle created a great deal of interference. Eventually, in 1972, in his effort to reduce this noise, Japanese physicist Takuo Aoyagi realized that it could be harnessed instead to give a measurement of heart rate as well as oxygenation. In 1980, Minolta commercialized the first finger pulse oximeter, and such was the improvement in safety throughout medicine that by 1987, pulse oximetry had become mandatory in the administration of general anesthesia. In 2007, the World Health Organization listed the pulse oximeter as an essential device for surgical safety. It is the modern-day trend to manufacture ever smaller mechanical and electronic gadgets with even greater processing power than their larger predecessors, and usually at a cheaper price. The pulse oximeter is no exception. Nowadays, it is possible to buy a battery-powered device with all the functionality of a hospital monitor, and at the fraction of the cost, typically £20. It is so small that it could find a home at the bottom of a handbag or backpack, readily available for any eventuality. This particular example is produced by a trusted name in healthcare. It can be assembled in seconds and has an eye-pleasing negative display which can be read in the dark. It is best placed on the index finger of the left hand and can be observed from any angle. How do they work? A pulse oximeter measures the amount of light absorbed by the blood. It shines two wavelengths through the fingertip, one red, the other infrared, which is actually invisible to the human eye. Oxygenated hemoglobin carried in the arteries absorbs infrared and lets red light pass through it. Conversely, deoxyhemoglobin absorbs more red light and allows infrared to pass through. A photosensor relays this information to a processor, which then calculates the proportion of oxygen actually in circulation. What do the readings mean? Blood oxygen levels are displayed as a percentage and described as SpO2. This reading exhibits the percentage of hemoglobin loaded with oxygen. Normal readings usually range from 95 to 100%. Values under 90% are considered low and indicate the need for supplemental oxygen. Heart rate is measured in beats per minute. A normal resting pulse for an adult ranges from 60 to 100 bpm. If at rest the pulse is above 120, it is known as tachycardia. Below 40, bradycardia. Both are cause for concern and can lead to life-threatening situations if left unchecked. Even with the introduction of screening programs and improvements in medication, cardiac arrest is still a major public health issue with high incidence and poor survival rates. In the hospital environment, healthcare staff use an early warning score to take observations, which has improved the response to clinical deterioration in patients. This tool can quickly determine the degree of illness and is based on vital signs, with particular attention to heart rate and oxygen saturation. But despite this effort to prevent deterioration, life-threatening emergencies still arise, and the ability to take a pulse is essential, especially if cardiac arrest is suspected. Most healthcare professionals know how to do this by hand, but it takes practice and skill, and that's why the pulse oximeter has become irreplaceable in helping to confirm the presence of a pulse or not, and whether to perform CPR or not. In the outside world, bystander rescuers dealing with cardiac arrest are relatively untrained in how to take a pulse manually and would benefit greatly from learning how to use pulse oximetry. This is especially true because AED machines, in spite of their ability to identify shockable ECG rhythms and deliver a shock, cannot detect a pulse. This makes a pulse check even more important. Failure to recognise the return of a pulse may result in continuing with CPR unnecessarily and impede the recovery process. On the other hand, if somebody has a pulse but is not breathing adequately, it would be appropriate to assist ventilation without compressions. This is called rescue breathing and can be performed easily with a bag valve mask circuit to prevent hypoxia.